Good evening. I'm Kelly Wright. Thanks for joining us tonight. And I do sincerely hope that wherever you are, that you're safe and well and taking care of yourself and your family. I'll get right to it. Here are my opening observations. Breaking news late this afternoon about the Atlanta police officer who shot and killed Rayshard Brooks. We now know through the district attorney's office that Fulton County District Attorney Paul Howard has announced that that officer, Garrett Rolfe, who fired the fatal shots, has been charged with felony murder. And he's already been fired from the police department. And Officer Devin Brosnan, who was there on the scene with him at that Wendy's parking lot last Friday, was also on the scene, has been put on administrative duty. He will be cooperating in the upcoming trial, testifying against Officer Garrett Rolfe. So those are the breaking details coming out of Atlanta. So here's what's happening. We're seeing swift justice taking place, the setup for what's going to unfold in a courtroom, and then we will find out what happens with this officer's fate. But here's something else. In this age of racial injustice, many people who have been marching through the streets of Atlanta and around the world since the death of George Floyd are now stating enough is enough, that we have to do something, not only the courtroom of law, but also in terms of how we police in our communities. There has to be police reform. Now, yesterday at the White House, we heard from the President of the United States with his executive order on police reform. There are pros and cons to that. We're going to be talking to some of the president's men, not only about that, but also about racism in this country. We are at a tipping point of trying to turn things around. How do we turn it around if we cannot sit down and talk to each other and have conversations and turn our pain into power and realize that Black lives matter? And those are my opening observations. So joining me now are three of the top African Americans who work within the Trump administration. They are Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, Ben Carson; President Trump's advisor on domestic urban affairs policy, Jerron Smith; and Ashley Bell. He's the regional administrator for the U.S. Small Business Administration and Entrepreneurship and policy advisor for the White House Opportunity and Revitalization Council. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us. Let me get right to it. Given the deep racial divide in America, can you share with us your thoughts on what specifically the Trump administration is doing to eliminate racism?
Well, America has had a history that is peppered with good things and with bad things. And have there been times when there was systemic racism? Yes, there have been times like that. We've made tremendous progress. There's still pockets of racism. There's still people who are racist. And obviously we have to continue to fight that until we have it under control. The COVID-19 crisis really shined a light on the fact that there are a lot of disparities, particularly in the African American community and the Hispanic community, that made them much more vulnerable to the morbidity and mortality associated with that disease. And the president has asked us to really focus on the reasons for that, not just to focus on the hypertension and the diabetes and the asthma and the obesity and the other comorbidities, but to ask ourselves, why do those things exist? And what can we do about them? And really to dissect that out, you begin to recognize that it has a lot to do with the housing conditions, the crowding, the inefficient and insufficient access to healthy foods, to the training, and to education. And that's one that I really want to strongly emphasize, because it doesn't really matter where a person comes from. If you give them a good education, they write their own ticket in this society. And we really need to begin to emphasize that a lot more, because a lot of the people who come from the neglected neighborhoods do not avail themselves or have access to the right kinds of education. So we need to make sure that we provide that for individuals. And then long-term health care, the ability not just to get your hypertension diagnosed, but to have long-term follow-up, because those are the things that really cause the morbidity if you don't follow up with these kinds of things. Utilizing health clinics, telemedicine, having much better data capturing mechanisms so that you can do the analysis and intervene more quickly. Those are the kinds of things that really make a long-term difference.
Jerron and Ashley, let me ask you, can you weigh in on that same question regarding what the administration plans to do to combat racism in our country?
Sure, I can first say that thank you for having me on the show. These problems aren't new. The president was elected off this whole notion that the system was broken, and so since day one, he's done things that no president has done. Investing in HBCUs, investing in opportunity zones, which 33% of those zones are overwhelmingly African American, or criminal justice reform, which has freed over 10,000 people from prison and have them home with their families. Now we're working through the other systemic issues that have been issues, like school choice and having access to whatever school is best for the children, or looking at things like access to capital, which I'm sure Ashley can talk a lot about, making MBDA, Minority Business Development Agency, permanent and creating access to funding. And then also investing into our minority healthcare schools, which could help deal with the racial disparities. And then lastly, the issue of now bringing the police and community together to create safe neighborhoods. All these are core issues that have been issues in many African American neighborhoods for a number of years. But the difference is this president is taking action and not just talking about the problem, but coming up with solutions.
And I think it's critical to also just remind everyone that a lot of these issues aren't new, as Jerron said, but the administration has been very nimble in adjusting to the situation on the ground, especially when it comes to getting access to capital in the middle of this virus. You've seen the payroll protection program not just have different numbers behind it, but just different focuses. Right now, you have a payroll protection program issued by SBA that is focusing on CDFIs, acknowledging the historical technical assistance bridge that has divided African Americans from access to capital, to making sure they have the additional assistance needed. I've been an entrepreneur my entire life, only worked for one person besides myself, and that's President Trump. And I can tell you that that bridge has been the greatest pathway for access to capital that I've seen and that many people have seen. Now we have a great opportunity. We've taken this challenge and pushed tens of thousands of new minority businesses into the system. A lot of them now have a relationship with a bank that they didn't have before because of the payroll protection program. Now we build on that by increasing that relationship, helping them with technical assistance, so as we recover as a country, that they're also the first to benefit from that recovery.
Jerron, you made reference to criminal justice reform, and right now the big issue is police reform. The president has announced his executive order on police reform. Where does that stand?
And so we're looking at real outside of the box ways of thinking that are practical and brings the police and community together. Because let's not forget that there are plenty of communities that are dealing with crimes of violence. And police safety is one of the number one issues to them. And so we want to be responsive, create the best police force ever, and also deal with public safety. And so that's what the president's doing. He's bringing the police and communities together so that we can build off the infrastructure that we just described, bring in access to capital, get access to education. But the foundation of that starts with public safety.
And I think we also want to look at the best practices. Where are the places where there doesn't seem to be a lot of problems? And a lot of that has to do with the relationships that have developed between the police and the community. I was talking to a police officer in Baltimore. He says he walks through the same neighborhood every single day. He knows everybody. They all know him. He knows when there's a problem. And probably the most telling statement he made is he says he never has to buy lunch because people are always inviting him in for lunch. That's what happens when people get to know the law enforcement, and I think that makes a huge difference in terms of what happens.
You're watching The Kelly Wright Show. We'll be back with much more after the break. You know, Secretary Carson, one of the areas of discrimination and racism happens in housing. And typically, African Americans have received the brunt of that. Redlining, for example, is still a great problem in the Black community. And as Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, what advice would you give to African Americans who are suffering even more profoundly during this COVID-19 pandemic? And in this economic climate stemming from the jobs that have been lost due to COVID-19, the great racial divide and disparity that we've seen, how do African Americans acquire safe and affordable housing?
Well, first of all, home ownership is a real goal of ours. Before the housing crisis occurred, everybody was talking about everybody had a right to a home, and a lot of people were put into homes that they couldn't afford. So in the African American community, we actually have less home ownership now than we had before that. So we obviously want to make sure that it's done in the right way, and we have the policies that really enable people to be able to acquire housing. So some of the programs that we put in place and that were expanded are family self-sufficiency type programs, where people can actually accumulate over the course of a few years enough money to make a down payment, and then provide them with the kind of technical assistance, the type of housing assistance advice, financial literacy that will make them into successful homeowners. Those are really critical points. And you've probably noticed it, HUD, over the last few years, our emphasis has been not so much on just maintaining people as allowing people to climb the ladders of opportunity and become self-sufficient. And I think that is really our major goal.
Gentlemen, I want to thank you, and we'll be back with more of The Kelly Wright Show after this. Welcome back. Joining me now on the program is attorney Mark Harrison. Of course, many of you who follow this program know that Mark also is a member of the Ben Crump law firm. And Mark, good of you to join us today. I want to talk about the president's executive order on police reform. As you know, the mother of Ahmaud Arbery was at the White House yesterday when he unveiled this. And she was basically stating any step forward to try to end this kind of injustice is important, but she declined to go out into the area where most of the media had been occupied there in the Rose Garden, due to the fact that she was feeling that, as well as other Black families, that they didn't want that to be a photo op for the president. What can you tell me about, from the Ben Crump law firm perspective, of what the thought is in terms of this executive order?
Let me tell you, Kelly, the views expressed are mine and mine alone. I got to give the disclaimer, right? This isn't as much an official position of the law firm as it is my own perspective. I'm the managing partner of Ben Crump Law, PLLC, here in Sacramento. But these views are my own. I haven't had a chance to talk to my colleagues about them yet, with this executive order just being released yesterday. Having said that, I've written a 9-page analysis of the executive order. And I know that sounds like a lot, but college professor and lawyer, what can I say? I have to think and write and process. And one of the most shameful parts of this, in my opinion, is nowhere in this executive order, which has 6 different subsections, is there a mention of the racism that brought all of this about in the first place. There's no acknowledgement by the President of the United States that the root of all this evil is the racism and the systemic prejudice that permeates law enforcement throughout this country.
That's what so many people have stated. Now, I've spoken to, or at least we heard from Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, Ben Carson, who will attest to the fact that racism does exist and that it must be dealt with. So you would think that would go into the language of the president's executive order.
Right.
And yet it is missing, sorely missing. So how should African Americans view this in going forward, especially at a time when the president states that he is the best president to African Americans since Abraham Lincoln?
Well, that's a disgusting, insulting thing for him to say. I'm personally offended every time he says that. I try to stay as apolitical as I can be. Kelly, as you know, there have been Democrats who have not walked this walk. They've talked the talk, including Joe Biden and his support for Clinton's crime bill. So I'm not criticizing the president or the administration because of partisan values. I think on human values, we have a number of families who lost loved ones. America's great, not so secret is that the foundation of this country, the bedrock, if you will, of this country is racism. From the very inception of this country, our 400-year journey in this place, redubbed the United States of America. And I say redubbed because, as we know, it was colonialized. It was something before it was even America. So to not acknowledge it begs the issue, but even worse, it hides the ball in terms of what's really the main thing here. It's hard to keep the main thing when the president of the United States doesn't even acknowledge what the main thing is.
Mark, I can't get into his head. I don't understand why he won't have a dialogue about race. And yet he continually attacks President Obama, saying that the previous administration did nothing about police reform. And yet we did see President Obama take steps to initiate change in policing. So I don't understand why this, well, I do understand. It's politics. And politics gets in the way of us finding ourselves to a place called getting it right and taking care of everybody and making the world understand that, and this president understand that Black lives do matter.
If you don't have confidence in the government or those who are governing, you have no hope that the governed will behave in an appropriate way moving forward. That's a lot of governs and governments. And here's what I mean by that. I have no confidence in Dr. Ben Carson's ability to deliver some of the provisions in this executive order relative to homelessness, relative to housing-related displacement issues. I have no confidence in Attorney General Barr, this president's handpicked Attorney General, to do the things that need to happen from a law enforcement standpoint at the very top. I have no confidence in the Office of Management and Budget to compile data and to be truthful about the results of that compiled data. If you don't have confidence in the structures and the people who are running the structures, then this whole thing has no hope. What can we do? Number one, I think we have to stop looking backwards and fix our gaze forward. That's the positive takeaway from what I'm talking to you about on your show, Kelly. We have to go forward. We have to demand certain things. A catchy term right now is defund the police, but when you get away from the shorthand, what it really means is reprioritize and reallocate the resources that have gone to law enforcement throughout this country on a disproportionately high basis. That should absolutely be an essential premise to make this bad situation better, is to defund the police or reallocate the resources that law enforcement has at this present time.
So Mark, what do we do? How do we bring this, how do we repair this breach between the police and the Black community? Because we can't afford another Breonna Taylor, where police officers barge into her house, unannounced, guns a-blazing, and she's dead. And she was on the front lines of helping people with COVID-19.
You know, I'm a lawyer. I'm trained to be a lawyer. The way I fight is with the law. We've been led in this country within the African-American community by preachers, by lawyers, by activists, and I consider myself an activist as well as a lawyer. We have to fight for what's right. One of the first things we have to say is that policing is broken in this country. We have to acknowledge that. At the core of policing is racism, is slave catching. That is a fundamentally flawed model for human behavior. So That's a problem, but so has been the drain of resources from our community in terms of dealing with de-escalation of conflict. We're talking about conflict resolution in most cases when police are brought to the scene. I don't believe that the young woman who called the police at the Wendy's in Atlanta ever would have believed that she was putting the person who was asleep at the wheel in the drive-through in a death sentence circumstance. There's no way she could have ever believed that. None of us in our wildest imaginations could have believed that. We keep believing that the police are going to exercise appropriate judgment, a humanity, and empathy. One bad apple, we keep being told. Well, one bad apple has become one bad bushel, which has now become a bad orchard. The whole process of policing needs to change. There are times when lethal force should be used, of course. Who in their right mind wouldn't acknowledge that? But no way that falling asleep in your car in a drive-through at a Wendy's restaurant should wind up in death under any circumstance that I can see. Under this so-called American justice system, we have to be vigilant to demand what's fair.
Mark, I appreciate you. Mark Harris, member of the managing partner, if you will, of the Ben Crump law firm, and also an economist, teaching a lot of people about how we can become financially literate. But
yes,
thank you for bringing us up to date and sharing your insights and your perspective on this executive order on police reform from the president. Mark, thank you.
It's always a pleasure. It's always a pleasure to join you and your viewers, Kelly.
Back with more after this. Welcome back to the program. So as you know, the COVID cases are spiking again. That's because in large part, many states have been reopening, including the state of Florida. So we go to Florida now, to Orlando to be exact, to talk to Dr. Ronald Lamar. He is a family medicine practitioner, but he's also working at a hospital there in Orlando. And Doc, you're on the front lines of the COVID-19 pandemic. And whether we want to face it or not, it's still here, and you're seeing cases rise in Florida. Tell me about it, please.
Yes, it's still here. I don't believe that it ever left. In fact, over the last, 4 out of the last 5 days, we've seen record numbers, greater than 2,000 new cases, basically daily.
That's alarming, because that basically causes a lot of worry and concern, and even overburden the hospital system there. Are you seeing some effects of that?
I can only speak on my hospital in particular. We have seen an increased number of cases, which, again, we kind of expect. We didn't really think that it ever went away. And in Florida, we've kind of adopted this out of sight, out of mind mentality, being locked up for so long, kind of to be expected.
Yeah, and of course in Florida you have, especially in Orlando, you got Disney World, and you've got the land of the sun, a lot of sunshine, a lot of beaches. And of course in Jacksonville, we saw that some healthcare workers were adversely impacted by COVID-19. Tell me about that, please.
Yeah, so there was a healthcare worker, her and 15 of her friends went out to a local pub, just that one pub, to celebrate one of their birthdays. And then all 16 of them contracted COVID from this one pub. It's of note to say that they have come out and said that they were not wearing masks the entire time they were out. So that probably played an important role in them contracting the virus.
So if we see healthcare workers not following their own guidance that we receive from Dr. Anthony Fauci, the CDC, the World Health Organization, doctors like yourself who are there on the front lines, how can we expect people in general who are experiencing all degrees of cabin fever to really comply with a simple thing like wearing your mask?
And I don't have an answer for that. Really, it's the $1 million question, is how do we get people to comply with the social distancing and wearing the mask? Studies have shown that your chance of transmission of the virus with a mask is about 3.17%. But if you don't wear a mask, it jumps to 17.4%. And that was a study released by The Lancet. So, I mean, it shows wearing the mask helps reduce the transmission.
From a medical standpoint, what would be your advice to me as a patient who's walking around saying, "Hey, I don't need a mask. I'm good"?
Don't think about yourself, think about other people. In the state of Florida, back in March, the median age of patients that were affected was 65.5. This month alone, and we're only 17 days into it, the median age has decreased to 37.
Wow.
So it's not so much yourself, it's for other people that you need to wear the mask for.
Wow.
Those who are elderly.
I think that says it right there. We do have to be concerned about others and wear the mask if nothing else to safeguard others, especially the elderly in our families. But like you said, it's happening across the board to the younger people as well. Dr. Ronald Larimar, we thank you for joining us today. And we know you've got a lot of work to do down there in Florida. You're on the front lines. Thank you for your service. And to you, my friend, be careful, be safe.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
We'll be back with more after this. Welcome back to tonight's program, and I'm delighted to introduce to you a gentleman who created something that is now having such a benefit to the people of Boston. He is the co-owner and founder and president of City Fresh Foods. His name is Sheldon LLOYD. Sheldon, thanks so much for joining us on this program today.
Thank you for having me.
I want to start originally with how City Fresh Foods got its start. What motivated you to launch City Fresh, and how have you seen it grow over the years?
Well, that's it's been education is really where it started. The company came out of education, teaching older youth how to get their GEDs, and with that was, well, it needs to be a little more than that. You have to understand business, because how are you going to survive? What are you going to do afterwards? So it was combining that with just doing business. So it started out teaching basic business skills in a market, selling produce, then on to catering, and then on to a larger company that started to really make traction.
And you and your brother launched this together, right? Your brother, Glenn?
Glenn, exactly. He came from education, I came from business, so it was a nice combination. And he was very involved socially in the community. I was a little more on the capitalist side, so but he's brought me around, and now I consider myself, like a social capitalist, so to speak.
Okay.
And the other part of that was the economic development side within the community where there were less resources.
What I like about this is that it's an African-American owned company. And how many years have you been operating now there in Boston, which is quite a competitive place?
Yes, we're going on our 27th year this July. I consider us kind of like an institution.
Yeah, can you believe it, man? 27 years, and now 2020 rolls around, and we're hit with this COVID-19 pandemic. And you have to marshal in all of your forces in the midst of a socially distancing platform that was placed upon all of us, shutting down, locking down, and you have employees to protect, and yet you have people in need, in dire need for food because of not only socially distancing themselves, but also being isolated. And then the bottom drops economically, Sheldon, and people lose their jobs. Now
Yes.
we've got people on the food lines looking for food, and you never skipped a beat with City Fresh. In fact, you stepped it up. Tell me about how you've been an outreach and oasis to people in need of food.
Well, I have to give a lot of credit to my team. and being a smaller local company, we can adjust, and we've done that in the past. And this was almost like what we had trained for, getting affordable, healthy meals out in large numbers, being able to deliver around the city. So for us, it went into a different gear of change every day, where numbers changed and new sites opened up. We partnered with a local organization, the YMCA, who took an immediate lead and opened sites outside of their facilities. And we brought in the food. That was the biggest jump. And then we also worked with our elder agencies, where all of a sudden, much more seniors were at home and needed, meals. So the orders were coming in, and then you had your staff that were, remember at the beginning in early March, it was this really secretive virus that, everybody was afraid of. So our people are very committed, and it's a family environment. But getting them to fear it, but respect it, and come to work, and then be safe with each other. Folks who are used to sitting next to each other very closely at break time, and changing behavior throughout the company. So it was an all hands on deck. You saw me in the floor frequently, and just getting masks. Some of the challenges were the PPE equipment. I've heard, we were essential workers. We were one step behind the health workers. But we had to make, I had to have one staff member at home making, PPE equipment, for our staff for the next day until things settled out. So we went into a mode. I mean, when you're in food service, you're also in a safe, safe environment. So we had one leg up, but behavior had to change. We had to shift out our operation to space people out. Something we could do in one shift, we would do in two shifts, that we had less people, for example. And then a lot of training.
Wow.
A lot of training.
I mean, it just looks like this was your mission in life. I know you've been operating for 27 years, but this moment, this critical moment, you've been meeting the needs of some, 14,000 to now over 30,000 meals a day, helping the people in Boston.
Yeah, you've got it. We had to expand delivery routes and, bring in, one of our products is door-to-door delivery for seniors. And there were a couple of days where I actually was out on the road, and it's been a while, from this. But one of the most humbling experiences. And again, I learned to, appreciate my staff as you're going into these buildings and you're serving these seniors, and you realize the situation you're in, but also the situation they're in, as they're trusting you to give them, this meal and to give it and for it to be safe. So those were experiences that helped us to, move and push forward, and where I can relate to, exactly what my staff are doing day to day and out on the road. So, hands-on was I think one of the biggest things that helped, the team get through it, as well.
Look, I think it's remarkable. I'd like you to stay with me, because when we come back after the break, I would like to talk to you more about the future for City Fresh. I know what you're dealing with right now. I know you're meeting the needs of thousands of people on a daily basis. But let's talk about what's in store for the future, because the city's reaching out to you. I know you have some other needs that you're meeting. We'll be back with more to talk with Sheldon Lloyd, CEO and co-founder, if you will, of City Fresh Foods there in the Boston area. We'll be back. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to the program. So I'm talking to Sheldon Lloyd. He is the co-founder, CEO, president, if you will, of City Fresh Foods. operating there in Boston. It's an African-American owned business that he launched along with his brother Glenn. And the results of this has been a 27-year journey. And Sheldon, to some degree, you're kind of under the radar. And then all of a sudden, this COVID-19 pandemic hits, and your team meets the challenge. And you're out there still helping people get their food that they need as a main sustenance in life. I find it remarkable that you've been able to carry on this program and help so many people with the help of the YMCA. And my understanding now is that you have to expand in the midst of this lack of expansion, if you will, because of COVID-19, where things have been kind of going under economically, and yet you're rising. Tell me about that and the vision that you have for the expansion in terms of getting a new building, a new place to operate.
Yes, what's happening in a lot of the cities, Boston as well, is that real estate has become, a great, it's a scarcity for, industrial companies and manufacturing business like City Fresh. And we have been growing at a pace, and I think that in the COVID, the other area that with all this need for emergency meals, it has really, we've become on the radar for the city and the state around the need for local supply and being able to service the local communities, especially in time of crisis. So we're prepared to look at other cities like a Boston. We'd like to get a bigger facility in Boston, and we'd really like to take this model and move it. Again, we've always been serving this population, whether it be the schools or Head Starts programs, summer program camps within the city, and so it'll work anywhere. And for us to see it work and to see it be relied on and being able to help in this time has been an incredible reward for all of us. So we're ready to move this.
So it looks like you're ready to expand beyond Boston as well and to hit other cities, major cities, or even rural areas if the need should arise.
It's all a possibility. Yes. I think we're a little different. We're getting ready to become employee owned or have an employee ownership. It's taken a long time. It's been our goal from the beginning to share wealth with those who helped us build the company in the community. Again, we employ mostly local folks, 98% of color, and so we want to create the wealth. And there's a big wealth gap in Boston, like in many cities. Yeah. So we're at a point now, the COVID has helped us in a way to, with the volume, to be able to offer an employee stock purchase plan. So we're hoping as soon as things level out a little bit here going into the fourth quarter, that we'll be able to offer shares to employees so that they will have they'll have some governance. I call it, it's treating it as I explain it to them, because it's a big gap between, folks on what they understand, as far as owning shares. But I tell them it's like owning a house. It will appreciate, and you will get, and you'll get, dividends, or income, as an outlay. But it's a big deal for us. This has really been one of our biggest missions.
That is fantastic, especially when you can say to an employee, well, no longer you're an employee, you're a part owner, because you have taken stock in what we're doing, and we're doing this together. I think that's so good, and especially to see an African-American owned business do this when 90% of your employee population are people of color. Now, your food, let's get back to the food real quick, because you also have a multicultural menu that you make every day, yes. And it's always fresh, city fresh, a la the name. Tell me about your menus and how people are loving it.
So one of our differentiators from the beginning was, and how we got into business ultimately, because, you know, we were trying to get it. It was going to be a takeout restaurant in Dudley Square, which is now Nubian Square. For those folks, that's an area that's like the Harlem of Boston. Yeah. And it was a desert, you know, when we, you know, food desert, basically, when we were opening up. So the goal was really just to do takeout to the area. And one of the, and the mayor came down, blessed the kitchen, and one of the agencies, senior agencies that, you know, service mostly folks of color, said, hey, can you feed our seniors? They're not eating the food that they want the food they grew up with. And of course, like any entrepreneur, you know, we're like, yes, of course we can. So we were doing Latin and Southern meals home delivered. And one of the things that we've always focused on was homemade food, you know, homemade with local supply sources. To an underserved market that was used to getting probably preheated food, right? Yeah. So we've been very successful. We have a Latin Haitian fused menu. We're now doing an Asian menu that's Vietnamese fused. We do a vegetarian menu. We do multiple menus now, and a traditional menu, Southern based. And so that's kind of our niche, you know, where it's not where it's just like a one menu provider for this marketplace. You can get a variety. And as I go in every day and I test my meals or get my samples, I'm like, oh, you know, it's like I'm at a restaurant. I have choice, which is important for, you know, especially the senior folks and even the kids now, you know, they want choice, you know, so we're able to give that to them, and it's been successful.
Sheldon, I'm proud of you and Glenn, man. And I'm praying and hoping that the expansion that you're getting involved in will take you out to cities well beyond Boston, and that your name will become a household name throughout this country, in major cities and smaller cities, especially in our areas, in the African American and Latino communities where there are food deserts, and certainly City Fresh can meet the needs there. And you're certainly proving that there in Boston. Can't thank you enough for being on the show. Keep us updated, keep us informed about what you're doing. And man, just kudos to you and your brother for having this dream and this vision, and not letting it go even in the midst of this pandemic we're experiencing.
Yeah, thank you very much. I appreciate your time.
Appreciate you too, man. You're an inspiration. You're living beyond the dream. God bless you.
Thank you, because that helps me. It helps me to hear it. Thank you.
All right, Sheldon Lloyd. Make sure you check out City Fresh Foods and watch them grow. In fact, get involved. Help a brother. All right, back with more after this. Welcome back, and I want to thank all of the guests who appeared on tonight's program, and I hope that you will take care of yourself and your family. My final word is this: let us continue to fight the good fight, to end racism wherever it rears its ugly head. And to also remember this: let's remain righted, ignited, and united in spreading not fear, not hate, but love, freedom, and peace. Good night. It's coming on a long train. Just give it time, give it time. Get on board. That means you and you.